Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report for Saturday, June 23rd, 2018, 9th year of Cheongi, in the 5th month and the 10th day by the heavenly calendar. Tim Miller sitting in for the second king with Cheonguk, Hyungjin Moon. And let's go to the weather. It's 60 degrees and cloudy at the Cheongung Palace this morning. And it's not going to get very much warmer. It's only going to go up to 68 degrees. We're going to have showers and a heavy thunderstorm during the day. That'll keep the temperature down. But tomorrow we should be back to more normal temperatures in the upper 70s and low 80s. That would be normal for this time of year. For our Bible Rima, I'm in Colossians this morning, a rather difficult passage. I need to know more about what Paul was trying to talk about, I guess, or maybe it's hard to know, whether sort of God wants us to look at this as a standalone Rima, or he just wants to say, forget about the context, just look at the verse itself, or if I need to study more about what Paul was trying to tell the people in Colossae at that time. But anyway, I'm in Colossians 2, verses 20 and, 20 and 21, 22, 20 to 22. Colossians chapter 2, verses 20 to 22. Wherefore, if ye be dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, why, as though living in the world, are ye subject to ordinances? Touch not, parentheses, touch not, taste not, handle not, which all are to perish with the using, after the commandments and doctrines of men. So, just doing a little bit of research on this, and apparently in Colossae, at that church at that time, there were people who emphasized spiritual experiences, and even saying that spiritual experiences were important or were signs of a person's faith. But here's what this commentary says, and this is just a commentary. All right, so may or may not be right, but says here that in the verses 20 and 21 that we just read, the rules of wrong religion is what it refers to. That is to say, the taste not, touch not, handle not, which are all perish in the using. Paul reminds his readers of an accepted fact: you died with Christ to the basic principles of this world. The moral response of true religion does not consist of codes having to do with Earth's elements, even if we are denying ourselves in the use of those elements. In fact, Paul will go on in chapter 3 to describe the moral life of Christian faith in terms of codes of human virtue and relationships. Colossus' spiritual umpire has been teaching that spiritual maturity is reflected more by the believer's self-centered asceticism than by transformed relationships. Logically, Christians who place greatest priority on otherworldly experiences will tend to deny the value of this world, even ironically, to emphasize its denial. In Colossae, where some equate spiritual maturity with otherworldly visions of angels, certain religious behaviors give concrete expression to their world-denying orientation. Thus, it is claimed the mature believer will abstain from certain foods or activities. Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. Such are those who are not yet liberated from the basic principles by affirming it in practice the lordship of Christ over earth and its elements. Okay, I'm maybe beginning to understand a little more, but anyway, that is something for you to think about this morning. I'm afraid I cannot go much further than that. Wherefore, if ye be dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, why, as though living in the world, are ye subject to ordinances after the commandments and doctrines of men? Okay. Let's go to Cheonseongyung Rima. I'm in the book on True Family, and chapter 7 of that, and I'm on page 478 in the electronic edition of the Cheonseongyung. This, at the very beginning of this chapter, the title of the chapter is "The Love of a True Husband and a True Wife." This is something that the king has been talking about quite a bit recently. Let's see what Father has to say here in the beginning of this chapter. And the section 1 is titled Original Relationship of Husband and Wife. God exists in dual characteristics of plus and minus. When this is manifested as a plus, it is Adam, and when it is manifested as a minus, it is Eve. Okay, maybe a little bit, I would not quite have translated it quite that way, but it's more or less consistent with the Korean. But anyway, the important thing here, and as Father goes on here in the next quoted paragraph, the one son and one daughter are a son and daughter who have appeared as substantial objects of the invisible God. As substantial object partners, the man represents God's plus characteristics and the woman represents God's minus characteristics. So when we use the word invisible, we have to be very careful because as a result of the fall, originally human beings were created by God to have 10 senses, not 5. 5 physical senses and 5 spiritual senses. And because of the fall, our spiritual senses are no longer functioning most of the time. That is to say, our ability to see not only the physical world. We have 5 physical senses by which we relate to the physical world. We are able to see, hear, taste, touch, and what's the other one? Anyways, we have 5 physical senses. Smell, I guess, yes, smell, that's it. And we have also 5 corresponding spiritual senses so that we can also relate to the spirit world. And for the most part, not always, but for the most part, these spiritual senses have been were blocked as a result of the fall. That's one of the results of the human fall. Now, by God's grace, sometimes these are opened, and we are able to hear. I once gave a testimony about how I heard the voice of God, and sometimes we're able to see. I don't usually have that gift, but in fact, I don't think I've ever had that gift. But some people are able to see spirit people in the spirit world, or things in the spirit world, or hear, or smell, or even to touch. When doubting Thomas, the disciple of Christ, disciple of Jesus, was in the upper room, and Jesus came to the upper room. He came through the wall, right? He came through the wall, so that suggests to you about something, but anyone won't get into that right now. Or he sort of suddenly appeared, I guess the Bible says. And Thomas said, "I want to touch you." And Jesus said, "Go ahead." And now the Bible does not say that Thomas actually touched him, but he could have. He could have, because Jesus' body was substantial, because the spirit world is substantial. And it's actually not accurate to say it's invisible, because if we had those spiritual senses, it would be visible. We would be able to see it with our spiritual sight, ability of spiritual sight, which, by the grace of God, is sometimes open to us, although generally it is closed. So when Father spoke about God, or spoke about the spirit world, he never used the word invisible. In other words, or the Korean word for invisible. The word he uses is without shape, 무형. The word that he uses is to describe the spirit world as 무형 실체 세계. There's without shape but substantial world. Without shape, substantial world. In the translation of the Divine Principle into English that was done in the 70s, this was translated as the invisible substantial world. And then in the 1996, or was it late 90s translation, this was changed to incorporeal world, which is probably, getting away from the idea of its being indivisible. It's probably a better translation, but it's, anyway, here again, so Father describes God as without shape. But in the Korean, I mean, English translation, it just says that it describes God as invisible. So, and sometimes, Father may say that God, I think God, he does say that God is invisible sometimes, but here he does not do that. He just says that he is without shape. Does not say that he is substantial, because he is not. God is not substantial. And that is why he creates human beings as his substantial partners. And that is an important distinction as well. So even in the spirit world, we're not able to see God. Even though we regain our spiritual sight, our spiritual senses when we go to the spirit world, we are not able to see God or to touch him, because he is without shape, and he is cannot be seen even in the spirit world. So as substantial, starting again, as one son and one daughter the one son and one daughter are a son and daughter who have appeared as substantial object partners of the, let's say, incorporeal God, or God who is without shape, rather than using the word invisible as the translator here did. As substantial object partners, the man represents God's plus characteristics and the woman represents God's minus characteristics. Now, of course, Father, in many other places, and fundamentally in the divine principle, says that men also have minus characteristics and women also have plus characteristics. So it's not a characteristics. God harmonizes the two characteristics and reunites them in a form that resembles his original internal nature. Men and women each resemble one characteristic of God when they are born. Hence, the union of one son and one daughter is the unification of God's plus and minus characteristics. In other words, they become a harmonious being like God. For this reason, the two people, that is, the husband and wife, are a union that represents the whole of God. The man becomes an incarnation of true Father's body by representing, now here it says true Father. Does it really say true Father here? I don't see. I'm looking for the word true Father here. Hold on a second. Okay, all right. Okay, yeah, I see, okay. Punshin, the Father uses the word punshin here. That's another important and difficult word to translate. Anyway, incarnation of true Father's body by representing, and the woman becomes an incarnation of the true Mother's body by representing the minus characteristics. Each man and woman is also a representative of God. When a husband and wife become one through love, this is like embracing heaven and earth. This is an encounter on the universal level. Since the husband represents all men, he is a representative of the father and a representative of the elder brother at the same time as he is the husband. And since the wife represents all women, she is a representative of the mother and a representative of the elder sister at the same time as she is the wife. Thus they cannot but love and respect each other. This was on April 16th, 1960. So this goes through here, Father's going through the internal nature of God and how that is expressed as in terms of human beings. We know through the original substance of divine principle that God did not create by choice. He created because it was a part of his nature to create. That is the understanding of Shimjung, that Shimjung is a irrepressible impulse, an irrepressible impulse, an impulse that cannot be repressed, cannot be resisted, an irrepressible impulse to experience a joy by giving love to an object partner. So God created because He needed to create. He needed an object partner in order to experience joy. And here the word partner is very important because He created human beings to not to be His, not to be something that is distant from Him, not to be something that He would just create and then leave alone and go off and be by Himself, like the clockmaker. A clockmaker, a watchmaker, creates a watch, and then he puts that watch aside, and he no longer needs to relate to it. He just makes it. He just starts it going, and then winds it up, and the watch goes by itself, and the watchmaker will go off and have dinner or whatever, and he doesn't care what the watch is doing. He will sell it, and that's the end. There's no ongoing relationship between the watchmaker and the watch. But with God, that's not the case. He has an ongoing relationship with His creation. He needs an ongoing relationship with His creation in order to experience joy, in order to experience love. And this is what is important. And so He creates us in order that He can experience joy and experience love through us. Every day there are people who take their own lives, who commit suicide. Because still alive. You are still alive in the spirit world with the same problems, only now you don't have the physical body with which you can fix those problems or which you can work through those problems. But what these people fail to understand is that God is always reaching out to them because He needs to, not because He is feeling sorry for them, not because He somehow wants to control them, but because He wants to experience joy through them, wants to experience love through them, because He needs them. This is one of the fundamental, really revolutionary aspects of True Father's teachings in his theology, that God needs us, that God, although He is omnipotent, although He has all power and all knowledge, He is vulnerable. And he needs us. He can feel sorrow. He can feel pain. He is a vulnerable God in that sense. And I hope that people can understand this and understand that God is reaching out to us, not out of pity, not because He's feeling sorry for us, but because He needs us. And when we say partner, that God created us as His partner, that means that He created us so that when we have completed our character and when we have reached the direct dominion of God, that in terms of our value, in terms of our love, we are on an equal plane with Him, that we will have a subject-object relationship with Him. That is to say that we will be able to have a give and take on that horizontal plane. Father said in one place that we read, Cheonsonggyong Rima that we read some time ago, that there can be no unity of heart in a vertical relationship. I was quite surprised by that. I wish I could find that again, but it's in the Cheonsonggyong. You can look for it yourself by reading the whole book. That would be a good idea. That we cannot have a unity of heart, complete unity of heart, when there is a vertical relationship. That requires a horizontal relationship. That is the wonderful thing that God created us to have that kind of relationship with Him. That with the Almighty God created us in that way. That is a very revolutionary aspect of our True Father's teaching, and one that we will come to accomplish someday. Of course, now we are still on that course to get there, but we will be there one day. All right, let's go to our news this morning. There are a lot of things going on in the world, and the news media in America is excited about the situation on the border, although that is not I would say, not the most important or most crucial crisis that is going on right now. But anyway, let's go through and see what people in the world think is, or people in general think is important, then we can come back and look at some other things. Trump pushes back against a border separation uproar. This is a Time magazine cover. We're looking at Drudge right now, and with Trump looking down at this young girl who is crying, looking up at him and crying. Of course, the father came out, and the mother as well, pointed out that this girl was never separated from her mother. Okay, let's take a break. We just had a situation here where we lost power. So let's take a break and we'll come back after we fix that.
Folks, and look at what I've got here today. My God, take a look at this. This is a BFR in 454 Casull with an octagonal barrel, magna porting, micarta grips. And look at that, it even has my initials on it, JM. Look at that thing of beauty, my God. Pop open the cartridge insertion door, and look at that cylinder spin. The finest revolvers in the world. That's a cannon. That's a cannon. Oh, man. Massive recoil.
Okay, welcome back to the King's Report for June 23rd, 2018. And we have our power back, and so we will continue. Time magazine cover has been controversial. President Trump has shown looking down at a girl who's looking up at him and crying. And, of course, the father has come out and said that this little girl was never separated from her mother. But Time has issued a statement saying that, yes, basically saying, yes, the photograph is fake, but it's still accurate. So the logical contortions of the left are very interesting, aren't they? Okay. Elsewhere, U.S. media, but as I say, this immigration thing is a crisis that is growing it is certainly the way that the Democrats are going to try to defeat Trump in the midterm election, also try to get him impeached. But I think there are other things going on as well. We'll talk about those a little bit later. USA median age hits 38 years old. And so the median age, that's the age, median means that half of the people are older than that and half of the people are younger than that. So it's not the average, it's the number of people who are older is equal to the younger people who are younger. That's all that means. But the fact that it is now at 38 years old means that the median age is going up, and so the population as a whole is growing older. And what this means is that, it means that fewer people in the workforce, fewer people having to support more older people like me. A record 86,248 centenarians, that's the number of people who are 100 years old or older. 400 people use California's California assisted death law. So people who choose to die, to take matters into their own hands in terms of their death. Rex Reed, the famous movie critic, says, "For love of God, will someone put Jurassic out of its misery?" Okay, I wasn't aware that those movies were still coming out. Okay, well, left-wing mob descends on Homeland Secretary's home. This is a part of the atmosphere of violence that is being created by the left and by the media, by the establishment. You don't see conservatives during Obama's time. We weren't descending on his the homes of his cabinet members, but the left is really quite violent because they cannot win on logic or debate, and so they resort to violence in this way. Left-wing mob descends on Homeland Secretary's home. WikiLeaks publishes identities of ICE employees. Same thing going on there. This fomenting this atmosphere of violence, and things are going to cross some kind of a threshold pretty soon. It looks like. Mexican presidential candidate says flood America, is basically calling for an invasion of America. Stormy Daniels heading to the border to help kids. Okay, I don't know. Stormy Daniels said she's, of course, the porn star who has made a name for herself recently in the news, and now I guess she's trying to show that, I'm not sure what she's trying to show. Anyway, moving on, fan spark plumbing flood and World Cup bathroom rush. Yeah, a lot of people flushing the toilet at the same time during a halftime or something like that. That's happened before. Lone woman digs for family lost under Guatemalan volcanic rubble. A very tragic situation. Paper pride parades used to mean protests. Now an excuse for straight kids to party. Okay. Any excuse to party. Johnny Depp's dirty laundry to be aired in court. Judge refuses to delay fraud trial. Anyway, the Hollywood star in trouble. Fox shares hit fresh highs. Fox shares, that's their stock, hit fresh highs on Disney deal cliffhanger. Anti-gun protester David Hogg protected by armed guards. That's always interesting, isn't it? That these people who are anti-gun will hire armed guards to protect them. There was an interesting photograph of the New York governor, Cuomo, joining a, what do you call it, a death end or something like that, where people lie down in the street or something. He also lied down in the street to protest guns, and his security guards were in the background, and they were armed. So anti-gun people love guns when it comes to themselves, but don't want everybody else to have guns. Workers accused of dealing meth out of Wendy's. Yeah, be careful what you order. Another court defeat for jailed Manafort. Tom Arnold, Cohen, and I teaming up to take Trump down. Trainwreck interview on CNN. Judge few client communications found so far in documents. That's the documents that were taken from his office. A Supreme smackdown need warrant to track phone. Yes, the Supreme Court says that the government cannot track our phones without a warrant. It seems obvious, but the Supreme Court had to say that. Masterpiece mystery, Da Vinci earliest work discovered? ? Sex crimes alleged at Hawaii home for naked parties. Well, yeah, not surprising. Out of control iguanas terrorize South Florida, triggering power outages, destroying property. Melania does it her way. Michelle Obama says memoir is a rehumanizing effort. Melania is an interesting person. Weekend, Turkey opposition candidate challenges Erdogan again in giant rally. There's going to be a presidential election on Sunday, and the current president is trying to run for a new term and have powers greater than what he has now. Socialist Bernie Sanders earns more than $1 million again. Yes, the rich socialist. That's what socialism does. So it creates an elite class with everybody else. And Bernie Sanders earning more than $1 million. Facebook's relentless drive to track every detail of users' lives. Big brands drop social influencers over fake follower fears. Young Trumpies hit D.C., and D.C. hits them right back. Let's look into that in a minute. Oscar Academy bends membership rules in diversity push. And Netflix's top spokesman fired over use of racial term. Galliano liberate men with satin and corsets. No, thank you. 30 years old, how well do global warming predictions stand up? We read that yesterday. Bill Gates engineered mosquitoes kill each other using sex. That's going to go wrong. And we'll watch 5 or 10 years from now. We'll be reading about what bad effects that has had. But if you mess with God's creation, it never turns out well. Venezuela urged to stop spread of measles and diphtheria. Well, those are some of the problems in Venezuela, but there are a lot more that are going on. Let's look at this one about young Trumpies hitting D.C. and D.C. hitting back. Let's see what that's about before we go on to the other things that I want to cover this morning. Let's see. This is in a political magazine. When Matt Mowers moved to Washington in November 2016, he wasn't expecting a hero's welcome. The young political operative had worked for Donald Trump's campaign in New York, where you can hardly walk down the block in many neighborhoods without spying the words "fuck Trump" scrawled somewhere on the streetscape. But last year, his new neighbors in DuPont Circle, the upscale area known for its stately townhouses and history as a hub of gay life in the district, pulled some moves that surprised even Mowers, by the Chief of Staff at the State Department's Global AIDS Office. In the run-up to Mowers' first Halloween here, one of his neighbors strung up a skeleton and a pumpkin next to each other on a tree. The pumpkin had a sign, "Now kids, just because you're orange doesn't mean you're related to him." With the dangling skeleton was a more menacing note, "Donald Trump's EPA director." There's always tension when administrations change in Washington. A new cast of characters arrive, and influx of appointees, lobbyists, and hangers-on have to stake out their own ground. But the era of Donald Trump is, as in so many respects, different. Washington is a hipper city now than it's ever been, a place where staffers, especially young staffers who want to drink and date and live normal millennial lives, would want to live. The problem is, if you work for Trump, it's also more hostile territory than it's ever been. The president campaigned against the very idea of Washington, slammed cities as war zones, and ran a racially charged campaign whose quoted messages weren't lost on the diverse, Democratic-leaning residents of D.C.'s buzzing neighborhoods. The bar-filled areas that became synonymous with young Washington in the Obama era, Columbia Heights, Shaw, U Street, H Street, are full of anti-Trump T-shirts and street art. Even old Republican redoubts like Spring Valley in Upper Northwest aren't very Trump-friendly. So what's a young Trumpy to do? Anyway, so this is a article that you may want to go into yourself. I'm not going to go into it any further here. But I used to live in a suburb of Washington, and so these districts that they're talking about are familiar to me, DuPont Circle and Columbia Heights, of course, It's where the Washington Church is located, or was located until, I guess they're now trying to sell it. U Street, 8th Street, worked in an office on 8th Street, those kinds of places. But in Washington, the kind of a half serious, half joke, well, actually it was kind of not so serious, but that is that every time there's a change in administration, the real estate prices go up because there's more demand from new people coming in, and the old people, they don't leave. They get jobs at some kind of a think tank or something like that. So they stay there in Washington so that they will be there when their party comes back into power. So there's always this situation in Washington where new people are coming in, old people staying, and there's always this tension between the two. That's certainly true. That's not how Washington was originally intended to be. When Washington D.C. was first established, of course, it was a swampland between part of Maryland and part of Virginia that was not good for agriculture, not good for much of anything. And so these two states sort of donated it to the federal government. And the idea was that very few people would live there, that the people would come and serve for a time in the city and then go back to their home states. But that has, of course, changed. That has changed very much, unfortunately. But it needs to be that way. All right. Let's look at this one article before we go to that other stuff. Let's look at this one article. We do have to look at what other people consider disastrous and important. Trump pushing back against the upper left-hand corner article. Trump pushes back against a border separation uproar. President Donald Trump tried to cast doubt Friday on wrenching tales of migrant children separated from their families at the border, dismissing phony stories of sadness and grief while asserting the real victims of the nation's immigration crisis are Americans killed by those who cross the border unlawfully. I think we spoke about this yesterday with the King as well, that when you're crossing an international border illegally, there's a lot of risk involved. In some cases, in some countries, you can be shot. Certainly, going from North Korea to China, for example, they will try to shoot you unless you've bribed the North Korean guards. And certainly in every other country, you will be arrested. If I try to enter Canada, not through an official port of entry, but just sort of walking across the border, the Canadian police, if they see me doing that, they will arrest me. And or if I try to walk into Mexico, if I were to go into Mexico, not through an official border crossing, but sort of try to walk across, and if a Mexican policeman were to see me, he would arrest me. And this is a true any place, any country in the world. But the left wants to say that should not be the case for America. Oh, America is a country of immigrants. Well, when the immigrants first came to the United States, there was no Social Security system, the government-funded Social Security system. Now, there's always been sort of ethnic communities that assisted new arrivals, and those communities actually play a very important role as a kind of a safety net or a net for people coming in. And so, when Italians came over, or Irish came over, or Scots came over, there were already existing communities of those ethnic groups that could help them in some way or another. And those communities were made up of people who had come over by themselves first, and then sort of somehow, managed to eke out a living and be successful. But the government itself was not helping these people. When my great-grandfather came over as a 15-year-old boy without his parents, he was kind of unaccompanied migrant, you might say, but he had to work in the coal mines. It looks like that's basically what it looks like, because on the census forms later on he listed his occupation as coal miner, and he was able to establish a certain foundation. And so 10 or 15 years later, he went back to Scotland and brought over some more of his relatives because he had established some kind of an economic foundation. And so that was how it worked. There was no sort of government program to help, or to, no food stamps, no one talking about guaranteed income or anything like that. But he was expected to make it on his own. So the difference today is that there is a Social Security system which cannot handle all the people who are coming over, who are trying to get in, and also today there is because there are so much more people trying to get in than back then, that there is established a legal process by which people come to this country. About 1 million people come to the country legally every year. About 1 million people come to the country legally every year. But that's not enough for some people. They want to come illegally, or they're not qualified to come. They're not the type of people that can be issued visas to come. So the left wants to just completely get rid of all borders and let the world's refugees flood into America, which will, of course, capsize America. It will destroy America. But that is their intent, because as long as America stands strong as a Judeo-Christian I won't say Judeo-Christian country, it is still fundamentally a Judeo-Christian country. And as long as that is the case, they cannot have this their system of centralized world government, a top-down centralized world government. And so that is why they want to destroy the United States in order to destroy the Judeo-Christian foundation that exists here, and so that they can implement their socialist utopia, worldwide, top-down centralized government, modeled after the Chinese Communist Party. And that is what they are trying to do by insisting that all migrants be accepted. So take away the guns, don't build walls, open all the borders. These things are all aimed at the same thing. Bombarded with criticism condemning the family separation situation as a national moment of shame, Trump came firing back, sometimes twisting facts and changing his story, but nonetheless highlighting the genuine grief of families on the other side of the equation. You hear the other side, you hear the other side, you never hear this side, said Trump, standing with a dozen of what he calls the angel families who lost loved ones at the hands of people in the country illegally. He focused on the fact that young migrants separated from parents are likely to be reunited, unlike the victims of murders. Quote, these are the American citizens permanently separated from their loved ones, the word permanently being the word that you'd have to think about. Permanently. They're not separated for a day or 2 days. These are permanently separated because they were killed by criminal illegal aliens. Amid mushrooming bipartisan concern over depictions of terrified migrant children separated from their parents, Trump on Wednesday had abruptly reversed course and signed an executive order to overturn the policy, although up to 2,000 children are still believed to be separated from their parents. But that rare moment of public capitulation was brief from the president, who laced his remarks at a rally in Minnesota that night with hardline immigration rhetoric that continued Friday. In a tweet, the president raised questions about whether the migrants' hardships really existed. We must maintain a strong southern border, the president tweeted. We cannot allow our country to be overrun by illegal immigrants as the Democrats tell their phony stories of sadness and grief, hoping it will help them in the elections. Obama and others had the same pictures and did nothing about it. Trump's suggestion that the stories were erroneous was likely fueled by revelations Friday that about one of the defining images of this political point in the crisis, a 2-year-old Honduran girl crying as her mother was stopped by a Border Patrol agent. But the girl in the photograph, who ended up on the cover of Time magazine this week, was not separated from her mother but detained with her, the child's father told the Daily Mail. Time magazine said it stood by the image because it captures, quote, the stakes of the moment, unquote. Trump has long chafed at the media's treatment, his fury only growing in the past week when he felt that he did not receive proper credit for his summit in Singapore with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He told the Trinity Broadcasting Network in an interview with former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, set to air Saturday, that he found the news coverage almost treasonous. Some conservatives seized hold of the migrant photo faux pas to attack the media. And White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders tweeted, "It's shameful that Dems and the media exploited this photo of a little girl to push their agenda." Other Trump allies have gone even further. Ann Coulter, a conservative pundit, said Sunday in an interview on Fox News that kids at the border were, quote, actor children, unquote, who were given, quote, given scripts to read by liberals. Coulter then turned to the camera and said to Trump, "Don't fall for it." A number of Democrats aggressively pushed back against Trump's claims. Representative Peter Welch of Vermont said Friday that Trump's assertions were bizarre and that the Border Patrol processing center he visited in Texas in recent days was nothing short of a prison. As part of his defense for his zero tolerance border crossing policy, Trump has frequently pointed to and exaggerated the threat posed by members of the violent gang MS-13 who have entered the United States. Well, whether or not that's an exaggeration depends on where you live. As I said, I was in the Washington suburbs, and in the Washington suburbs, MS-13 was a real threat. They were using motels there, and this was about 10 years ago. They were using motels in our neighborhood as a kind of a base, and people there felt threatened. There was an article back then about how one day a child came home from school and told his parents that he had been approached to join MS-13. And the parents that day packed up and moved. The whole family packed up and moved. Because whether the child accepted the invitation or not, his life would be at very serious risk. Girls were being initiated into MS-13 by the roll of the dice. And that means that a die would be cast. In other words, they roll a single die, and whatever number came up between 1 and 6, that would be the number of MS-13 men that she would have to have sex with right then in order to be be accepted into the gang. And MS-13 is a gang that other gangs fear, and MS-13 is not a joke. And AP seems to say that Trump is exaggerating the threat of MS-13, but I would disagree with that. I don't think it can be exaggerated. In what was likely not a coincidence, the Justice Department on Friday unsealed an indictment charging 11 suspected MS-13 gang members in connection with the killings of 2 teens in Virginia. See that? Virginia. All the suspects were from El Salvador. But the central piece of Trump's attempts to counter-program against the despairing images at the border was to stand with the angel families, as he did repeatedly during his presidential campaign, including at the 2016 Republican National Convention. At the somber event at the White House complex on Friday, Trump introduced the families who delivered heartbreaking tales of their loved ones' lives and at times gruesome descriptions of their deaths. Many of them held large photos of their loved ones, some of which the president autographed. Trump said that one of the victims looked like the actor Tom Selleck. "Your loss will not have been in vain," Trump said. "We will secure our borders and we will make sure that they're properly taken care of." The president also rattled off a litany of statistics that indicated that illegal immigrants commit violent crimes at a far higher rate than U.S. citizens, saying, you hear it's like they're better people than what we have, than our citizens. It's not true. A Homeland Security report said that there were 972 calls reporting crimes to its victims of immigration crime. So President Trump trying hard to hold the border, hold the line on the border, and he certainly needs our prayers to be able to do that. Because he of course highlights the crimes that are being committed by illegal aliens, but even more than that, it's about maintaining the integrity of U.S. sovereignty and of the U.S. border. That's what borders represent. Borders represent sovereignty. And the people who are trying to tear down those borders or insist on open borders are trying to undermine and are undermining U.S. sovereignty. And that is their purpose. That is their purpose. For a long time, the United States, for a long time, meaning World War II and onward, basically, the United States has stood for Christian values, Judeo-Christian values. And people who oppose those values want to tear this country down. And the open borders attempt is a serious attempt to do that. And of course, we have that story about the Mexican presidential candidate who is now still a candidate, but he's talking about flooding the U.S. Where was that? It was on Drudge. I can't find it right now, but a Mexican presidential candidate. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Mexican candidate immigration speech here. Okay, it's a human right. It's a human right. What does he say is a human right? Coming to the United States? Just a minute. Let me get the rest of that headline. Yes, that's what he's saying, yeah. Believe it or not, people come up with all sorts of human rights these days. It's a human right, Mexican presidential candidate on mass exodus to America. My screen is not cooperating quite as much as I would like for it to, but we'll be there in just a minute. Mexican presidential candidate, I had it and then it moved again. Mexican presidential candidate Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador called for mass immigration to the United States during a speech Tuesday declaring it a human right for all North Americans. Quote, and soon, very soon, you know, it's a human right for my screen to stay still. That's what I'd like to, that's the human right that I want. And hear an ad popping up on me while I'm reading this, trying to read this, Anyway, he says that it's a human right for all North Americans to emigrate to the United States. So that means all of Mexico, all of Canada can come to the United States. And soon, very soon, after the victory of our movement, we will defend all the migrants in the American continent and all the migrants in the world, Obrador said, adding that immigrants, quote, must leave their towns and find a life in the United States, unquote. He then declared it as a, quote, a human right we will defend. ElUniversal.com reports. While the election is not until July 1, Obrador is by far the front runner. Okay, well, so it looks like this is what we're going to be dealing with. Obrador in April delivered a speech criticizing Trump and promising that Mexico will not become I don't know the Spanish, piñata for any foreign government, Global News reports. The former mayor of Mexico City, Obrador, holds progressive populist views. The 64-year-old ran unsuccessfully for president twice before. Fox's Tucker Carlson noted Thursday that Obrador has previously proposed granting amnesty to Mexican drug cartels. America is now Mexico's social safety net, and that's a very good deal for the Mexican ruling class. Carlson added. So the Mexican presidential election on July 1, and apparently we're going to have a president in Mexico who, people say one thing during the election campaign, another thing once they get into office, but it's quite possible that there will be some kind of an effort to just sort of crash the border with the masses of people. Previously this year, we had that caravan. That was not Mexicans, but that was people from El Salvador and Honduras, mostly coming up. And as they came up through the Mexican territory, they were reduced in numbers. They started out about 1,500, but then whittled down to a few hundred, and that turned out to be kind of a blip. But something much larger than that could be coming in the next few years. And yeah, this is a time of judgment. So that kind of thing, that's the kind of thing that would be consistent with the ongoing judgment that is going on. All right. Let's take a break right now, and then because there's something I want to start, but we won't start it until we come back. All right. So let's take a break. Welcome back to the King's Report for June 23rd, 2018, a Saturday. Tim Miller in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon. And this hour, I wanted to go to another situation which I think is actually just as, or actually even more important than the immigration situation on the border right now. The immigration situation is not going to bring down America in the short term. It's more of a longer term problem, although it is a very serious thing and it requires short-term solutions, and I think President Trump is doing what he needs to do. But a more short-term problem, a more immediate problem, is this situation with the debt and the impending collapse of the U.S. economy. And I don't know how else to express it. And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is not an exaggeration. And I'm going to show you why. Well, okay. Let's do the financial report first. After all, like I originally told the tech team during the break, every year the U.S. Treasury Department issues a report on the financial status of the government, and this is just like the annual or similar to an annual report by a company. It tells us what the government has in terms of assets and so forth, and revenue and how much it owes and how much it's spending, and gives some idea of long-term projections. And just like a company does that, the United States government also does it. And so at the end of last year, this kind of report was issued. And is the tech team showing the page? Okay, let's go to page 38. At the beginning of the report is a statement by the Comptroller General of the United States. And here I want to read this one paragraph on page 38. The 2017 Statement of Long-Term Fiscal Projections and Related Information in Note 23, and in the unaudited required supplementary information section of the fiscal year 2017 financial report of the United States government, that's this report, show that absent policy changes, the federal government continues to face an unsustainable long-term fiscal path. Over the long term, the imbalance between spending and revenue that is built into current law and policy is projected to lead to continued growth of the deficit and debt held by the public as a share of gross domestic product. This situation in which debt grows faster than GDP means the current federal fiscal path is unsustainable. I think it's pretty obvious what that's saying. It says that, hey, you know what? We're heading over a cliff. That what the path that we're on now, unsustainable, means that it's going to crash. It's going to crash. Not that it may crash, it will crash. Because you cannot, just like you cannot expect to be able to defy the laws of gravity, you also cannot expect to defy the laws of money or finances and continue to spend more than you have in revenue, more than and just borrowing. Right now, the U.S. National debt, I believe, is somewhere like $21 trillion, and it's growing. During the Obama years, it increased from, I think, 10 trillion to 20 trillion, something like that. It about doubled during the Obama years. And it's continuing to grow. And recently I was watching a video on YouTube where Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, appeared. And the person interviewing him said, when is this continued increase in debt going to actually start affecting the financial markets? Because right now the markets act as if it doesn't exist. They've completely got their head in the sand. And Alan Greenspan said, well, much sooner than later. But he said he cannot predict exactly when it's going to happen, but sooner or later it will happen, and probably sooner than later. In other words, this is something that is actually coming down the pike, and everybody, or most everybody, I would say everybody acts as if it's not there. And it's a crazy, ridiculous situation. And this comptroller of the United States says that this path is unsustainable. Alan Greenspan, who was a Federal Reserve Board chairman for many, many years, starting in 1987 or so, and going through a few presidencies, and many other sort of experts, investment experts also agree that this is going to happen. So they all agree it's going to happen, but anyway, I guess they say, okay, well, not today anyway. It's not going to happen today. Well, one of these days it will happen today. One of these days it will happen today. And the longer it takes to come to terms with this, and the longer it takes for the bubble to actually burst, the bigger that burst is going to be. And when it bursts, it's going to be a huge mess. It's going to be a huge mess. And people agree that it's going to be much worse than 2008 or 1997, and that there's going to be a huge amount of pain all around. I forgot. I was going to make a point, but I've forgotten what it was. I'll try to remember it. But anyway, let's go to the Mercury News article now, because in a small way, President Trump was trying to do something about this this past week, but the Senate blocked him. The title or headline of this article is "Senate Rejects Billions in Trump Spending Cuts." So President Trump submitted a plan to Congress saying, "Hey, you know what? Let's start cutting the spending." And the Congress said, "No." Well, this is what I was going to say. Greenspan, another point that he said was that in Washington, when Democrats and Republicans, or enough Democrats and enough Republicans, are able to agree on something, on a particular policy, that's what gets implemented, regardless of whether that's good for the country. And so he said that this problem exists, this problem with the debt exists, but the U.S. political system is simply incapable of dealing with it. Fundamentally incapable of dealing with it. We're not able to solve this problem. So a crash is coming because we know it's coming, but we're incapable of avoiding it. We're incapable of doing what needs to be done to avoid it. The U.S. political system as it exists today cannot deal with this problem. As Greenspan was saying, always, if you have a choice between decreasing, cutting taxes and increasing spending, or the other way, raising taxes or cutting and raising taxes and decreasing spending, then always the politicians will go for the popular course. They will always want to cut taxes but also increase spending, and that's what causes debt. Even though the cutting taxes is increasing the growth of the GDP right now, but it's too late. It's too late. It's too far gone for us to be able to grow out of this, because the debt continues to increase, and it will continue to increase. Anyway, let's see. This is actually a Washington Post story. As I said, Washington Post provides its content to newspapers around the country. And that's one example here. The San Diego, I guess, Mercury News is republishing a story from Washington Post. And so we can read it here without having to subscribe to the Washington Post and give money to Bezos. The Senate on Wednesday rejected billions in spending cuts proposed by the Trump administration as 2 Republicans joined all Democrats in voting no. So, you see, the Democrats unanimously voted against cutting spending. The 48-50 vote rebuffed a White House plan to claw back some $15 billion in spending previously approved by Congress, a show of fiscal responsibility that was encouraged by conservative lawmakers outraged over a $1.3 trillion spending bill in March. The House had approved the so-called rescissions package earlier this month, but passage had never been assured in the Senate, where a number of Republicans had been cool to the idea from the start. Nevertheless, Wednesday's outcome was startling because one of the no votes came from Senator Richard Burr, Republican of North Carolina, who does not normally buck the White House or leadership. Burr's office had no immediate comment. Yeah, that'd be interesting to find out exactly what Senator Burr had in mind when he said no to this. Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, a moderate who is one of the Republicans who most frequently sides with Democrats, cast the other no. The cuts in the rescission package, including $7 billion from the Child Health Care Insurance Program, mostly from an expired account that can no longer be used. So this money was not going to be used anyway. $5 billion from Energy Department programs, including a little-used program for advanced technology vehicle manufacturing, and smaller amounts from a variety of other programs ranging from Forest Service land acquisition to the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Independent analyses said that since most of the money would not have been spent anyway, the actual spending reduction was closer to $1 billion. But the Democrats wouldn't allow even that. That's a tiny fraction of the federal budget, but conservative lawmakers in both chambers viewed it as a start in showing Congress's commitment to reining in spending in a midterm election year at a time of drastically rising deficits and debt. Rescission authority is a mechanism little used in recent years that allows presidents to submit to Congress a request to cancel spending it has already approved. $1 billion is not very much money in the terms of the U.S. Economy or even the U.S. Federal budget. But the Democrats unanimously rejected what effectively was closer to $1 billion in spending cut. $7 billion from the Child Health Insurance Program, which I'm sure they must have railed about, but that was not going to be spent anyway because it's in a program that has already expired. And $5 billion in Energy Department programs, including a little-used program for advanced technology vehicle manufacturing. What is the government doing? Manufacturing vehicles in smaller amounts from a variety of other programs, ranging from the Forest Service land acquisition for the federal government to buy even more land than they already have. So that is the state of our political system, that we cannot even cut a single $1 billion, even a trifle from the budget, to even show some kind of a commitment to not even trying to reduce the deficit. So, yeah, the crash is coming because we know it's coming, we see it coming, but we cannot avoid it. That is the state of America today. And that, I think, is more serious than the migrant crisis. Although the migrant crisis is serious, this is even more serious because we don't know when it's going to happen. This is one thing that the experts, including Greenspan, are saying, that it's going to happen, but no one can predict when exactly it's going to happen. And so people keep investing and keep spending as if it's not going to happen. So, well, we know it will, so what do? Well, we have to prepare for it. And the Second King has been helping us and teaching us on how to do that kind of preparation. One thing is to get rid of your debt. Get rid of your debt. Japan went through a period of deflation. And some people say, well, deflation is the opposite of inflation, where prices are going down. And some people say, well, in deflation, it becomes easier to repay your debt. Well, except that salaries also go down. Because in deflation, what happens in deflation is that people will delay purchasing things. For example, why buy a house today when you know that the price for that same house is going to be lower next year or even next month? So this is what happened in Japan for many reasons, but that real estate prices went down, cut in half or even more in many cases, and still have not recovered. This started happening to them in the late 80s, early 90s. And so they talk about the lost decade, except the lost decade turned into a lost 2 decades. And they had a long fight with deflation. But many people say that that there will be hyperinflation, maybe first deflation and then inflation. But in any case, having debt as we go into this crash, this impending crash, I would call it, is a bad idea. So, do everything you can. Do everything you can to get rid of debt. Although, in the past 10 years or so, what we've learned is that it doesn't really pay to be responsible. It pays actually to be irresponsible. But that's not going to last much longer. What I mean is that in the past, for example, in the mortgage situation, 2008 was it, when people were not, a lot of people were not repaying their mortgages. Well, the government started a program for people who couldn't repay their mortgages. So, and in many cases, mortgages were kind of forgiven, right? So it paid to be irresponsible. But that's because the government takes on more debt in order to fund those programs, and that is actually part of the problem. And when we come to this economic crash, it's going to be a new environment where the government will not be able to do that, and that's going to be a large part of the pain that the people are going to feel. So yeah, let's get out of debt, please. Let's get out of debt, because that's the only responsible thing that we can do right now. It's a terrible thing, but all this talk about reduced unemployment, increasing growth, that's all true, that's all well and good, that's all wonderful, but behind that, there is this impending crash that is going to happen sooner or later, and probably a lot sooner than later. All right. This morning I want to look at some articles on worldtribune.com. They have posted a lot of good stuff the last couple of days. Especially they have this one article on Korea, or a couple of articles on Korea that we can look at. That's the other things. So many things going on right now, any one of which could alter our environment drastically, shall we say. I think is this a new article they just put up? The State Department had access to Steele dossier before the FBI. U.S. Embassy in London played a key role. The Obama State Department had access to parts of the discredited Trump dossier before the FBI had obtained the document, a report said. The State Department officials obtained and reviewed parts of the infamous Steele dossier by mid-July 2016, well before FBI headquarters had access to the document, the Daily Caller noted in a June 22nd report. A senior State Department official in the Obama administration cleared the way for an FBI agent in 2016 to meet with dossier writer Christopher Steele, according to a Washington Times report in March, citing a book, Russian Roulette, by Michael Isikoff and David Korn. The U.S. Embassy in London was also an early recipient of information about former Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos that the FBI would use to justify opening its counterintelligence investigation in late July 2016, the report said. The State Department's involvement in Trump-Russia matters has received little media attention, but it has grabbed the interest of House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes, the report said. Nunes said he has investigated major irregularities in how the State Department handled unspecified information used in the Russia investigation. The dossier, authored by ex-British spy Christopher Steele, was a key cog in launching the investigation. Victoria Nuland, who was the Obama State Department's top Russian expert, revealed in Senate testimony on June 20 that I was first shown excerpts from the dossier, I believe, in mid-July of 2016. It wasn't the complete thing, which I didn't see until it was published in the U.S. press. Nuland, Jonathan Weiner, and Elizabeth Dibble appear to be key to the Senate Department's role in handling Trump-related Russia information, the report said. Nuland had come forward in February to acknowledge that she received and handled information from Steele. Weiner wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post on February 8th, asserting that he was being unfairly targeted by Nunes. Okay, so that's that information on the ongoing situation there, which we're all tired of talking about and reading about, and really Mueller needs to get that investigation concluded as quickly as possible. Let's look at this Tang Dynasty Emperor Taizong, President Donald Trump, and the Korean Peninsula. See what this is about, by Miles Mao Chun-yu in the Hoover Institution. In the ancient Chinese military strategy classic, Questions and Replies between Tang Taizong and Li Weiguang, the great Tang Dynasty Emperor Taizong of the 7th century famously ruminated that in war, we prefer the position of the host to that of the guest. In essence, Emperor Taizong's pithy statement sums up China's long-standing strategic approach toward the decades-long military standoff on the Korean Peninsula, i.e. to play the host and to make the U.S. and its allies play the guest. In Chinese strategic parlance, playing host means maintaining the capability to control the process and direction of the conflict by creating dependency both in North Korea as China's proxy and in the United States as China's enemy, on Beijing's own terms and the degree to which the Chinese leadership is willing to cooperate with the U.S. to solve the North Korean problem. The historical fallout of this Chinese strategy on the Korean Peninsula, developed since the outbreak of the Korean War in June 1950, has always been China playing the host, and the epic conflict, while the U.S.-led coalition has been forced to play the guest by fundamentally relying on China's crucial moves, passively reacting to initiatives taken by China. China's participation in the Korean War was the most decisive factor in deciding the current geopolitical and geostrategic status quo on the Korean Peninsula. In the ensuing decades since the ceasefire in 1953, China was the most generous source of political, economic, and military support for the Kim dynasty in Pyongyang. Even when China itself was on the verge of economic ruin under Mao Zedong's catastrophic rule, Beijing never relinquished the vital economic and military support to Pyongyang to keep its proxy regime in Pyongyang in operation. Pyongyang's dependency on Beijing was so deep that in the deadly internecine fight for worldwide leadership of the communist movement between the Soviet Union and China, North Korea was one of the only two Stalinist regimes, the other was Albania, that did not overtly abandon Beijing for Moscow, unlike a host of other Moscow proxies such as Cuba and Vietnam. The cliché in China for decades has been that Beijing keeps North Korea as close as the distance between lips and teeth. That's always been true. These days, unfortunately, the teeth are biting the lips. In the aftermath of the Cold War, that, by the way, was, I think, Mao Zedong's saying, in the aftermath of the Cold War, North Korea was stunned by the profound perfidy of China's 1992 diplomatic recognition of South Korea, Pyongyang's sworn enemy. In response, Pyongyang embarked on the dangerous path of developing nuclear weapons, in part to reduce its strategic dependence on Beijing. For a similar reason, Mao Zedong had also foolhardily pursued his own nuclear ambitions in the late 1950s in order to reduce China's strategic and nuclear dependency on Khrushchev's Soviet Union, which Mao believed had turned from hardcore Marxism and Leninism to revisionism. Excuse me. Though China is displeased with Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions, Beijing has nevertheless done little to stop it, because North Korea's nuclear ambition has simultaneously created a dialectical twist in Beijing's favor. Kim's costly nuclear projects are depleting his country's limited economic and financial resources, giving China an unusual opportunity to deepen Pyongyang's dependency on Beijing's enormous economic and financial assistance for regime survival. As a result, for nearly 3 decades now, China's host role in the nuclear standoff on the Korean Peninsula has become even more pronounced as Beijing has become the go-to place for the U.S. and its allies to solve the North Korea problem, since China holds the key to Pyongyang's economic survival, thus exerting a preponderant influence over North Korea. China has used its influence over North Korea as its most powerful leverage against the U.S. and its allies over a host of other profound issues, including human rights, regional and global security, marketing, capital access, and technological transfers. Well, I think so far he's basically saying pretty much what a lot of other people have been saying, including myself and the king, but maybe a little more academically well written. Since the George H. Bush administration, the 5 American presidents in a span of nearly 3 decades have been forced to be Beijing's guest as China plays the host in ultimately deciding the course and menu for a party of 6 nations known as the Six-Party Talks. Prolonged and non-productive phony dialogue with Pyongyang on denuclearization in North Korea, to which China has been overtly and covertly supplying the overwhelming majority of its energy, food, and other vital needs, with North Korea's nuclear projects making critical progress along the way, directly threatening the U.S. homeland. All this began to change swiftly soon after Donald Trump became America's president. As a seasoned Manhattan real estate mogul, a profession which has honed his gutter-fighting gamesmanship, President Trump understands the root of the North Korean conundrum, and he has taken the bold initiative of direct negotiation with Pyongyang without China as the host. By cajoling and forcing China to implement UN sanctions on Pyongyang, the U.S. closed the loopholes that have kept the U.S. losing leverage to Beijing. By promising economic prosperity to North Korea in exchange for denuclearization, President Trump not only reduced North Korea's dependency on China, but he also might have saved the world from a nuclear holocaust. Okay, now he starts going into la-la land here. Anyway, we'll get to it. From now on, the American president can directly negotiate with Pyongyang without Beijing playing a decisive role in the middle. Thus, when President Trump and Kim Jong-un went to Singapore last week to meet face-to-face in the climactic act of a nuclear drama, the biggest loser was Beijing, as China's host role as the ultimate and manipulative middleman in the Korean crisis was gone instantly. President Trump has miraculously reversed the roles of host and guest in a matter of several months. It is now the U.S. president who is playing the host on the Korean issue, and China has been mercilessly relegated to the role of a far less relevant guest. Even Emperor Taizong would have been amused by the swiftness of the role reversal. Okay. All right. He was going pretty good there until he got to the last 4, 5, or 6 paragraphs. Okay, so let's look at these last 5 or 6 paragraphs. By promising economic prosperity to North Korea in exchange for denuclearization. Dictators, really don't want prosperity for their people. I guess, all right, an exception may be Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, where he managed to maintain his authoritarian grip on the government and on the society despite Singapore's prosperity. But I think that's kind of a special exception. Other countries like Cuba and North Korea itself, and some people might say China is an exception, but China is an exception only because they've spent an inordinate amount of money and resources in controlling the population and controlling the internet. So in a sense, I would say that China is not a sustainable model for prosperity under a communist dictatorship or a centralized dictatorship. You got to keep your people poor so that they are too busy trying to make a living and don't have the time or the energy to fight the government. Venezuela, of course, is another example of a situation where the government keeps the people poor or rewards a certain segments of the population for their support, but the large majority of people are kept poor so that they cannot rebel. So Kim Jong-un may want a certain level of economic growth or development, but I think that would be a very limited level. He definitely does not want North Korea to be like today's South Korea, because in that kind of a situation, the current political system would be unsustainable. You can only maintain the current North Korean regime in a poor country. And what they want most of all is regime survival. That is what they want most of all. And this is actually what this author was saying towards the top of the story. But then suddenly, in this paragraph, he acts as if he starts writing as if President Trump's promise for economic prosperity in exchange for denuclearization is something that North Korea would actually consider. The other half of the equation, of course, is that they're not going to denuclearize. They're not going to get rid of their nuclear weapons. No, if you look at it from Kim Jong-un's perspective. You can look at it in other ways too, but look at it from Kim Jong-un's perspective and say, look, why did President Trump meet him? Why has Xi Jinping met with him 3 times this year? 3 times in the last 3 months. He went to Beijing again last week. He went to Beijing. I think it was on Wednesday, right? Thursday, I think. Why he got to go to Singapore? He got to go to Beijing 3 times, and the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov has been to Pyongyang, and Putin has invited him to Russia, and all of a sudden the whole world is very interested in him. His popularity is rising in South Korea. Why? Because he has nuclear weapons. I mean, without nuclear weapons, North Korea is poorer than Haiti. When's the last time the president sat down with the president of the leader of Haiti? I don't even know if it's a president or what. It doesn't happen. The president of the United States does not sit down like that and go halfway around the world to meet with the leader of one of the poorest countries in the world, which is what North Korea would be, or is actually. It is one of the poorest countries in the world, which happens to have nuclear weapons because they put all their resources into nuclear weapons, thinking that this would guarantee the regime's survival. Now, of course, they've told their population that now you can have economic development. So they do have to deliver to some extent on that promise, but not nearly to the extent that President Trump is talking about. But it is true that President Trump has reversed the role of a host and guest, as he's talking about here, and has relegated China to being a very irrelevant guest. And so China now is trying to make a comeback. So that's why they invited Kim Jong-un to Beijing last week, because now they want to play the role of guarantor, which that word kind of has a very Asian meaning. It's hard to describe, but yeah. But I think the best way to understand North Korea and China and the U.S. is to watch a mafia movie. Because North Korea is kind of like a captain in the Chinese mafia. I'd say Xi Jinping is the mafia boss, and Kim Jong-un is one of his captains, and Trump, I guess, is kind of the FBI, maybe. Trump is kind of the FBI who's out to, or the prosecutor who's out to try to put the mafia boss in jail. Maybe that's the way to understand what's going on in East Asia. And the mafia and the FBI right now is talking directly to the captain, which the mafia boss is not happy about. But he can't do anything about it. He can't do anything about it for now. But he wants to be the guarantor. He wants to be the guarantor of North Korea. Yeah. Which I guess means that I guarantee that if you get too close to America, we're going to smash you. We're going to whack you. That's basically, I think, what guarantor is going to mean in practical terms. Yes, you're going to find yourself at the bottom of the East River if you get too close to the United States. Because, really, China does not want North Korea to get too close to the United States. And, yeah, they've lost that position of host right now. So how do they get it back? I don't know. They don't know. Chinese don't know. Xi Jinping doesn't know. I think he's probably got a team of people working on this right now. How do we get back the position of host on the Korean Peninsula as this in terms of this author? How do they do that? Yes, that'll be interesting to watch. And I'm sure they will do something. I'm sure they will do something. They will maybe create some kind of crisis. I don't know. Maybe manufacture something, kind of a false flag type situation. That's been done. Of course, the Japanese invasion of China in the 1930s was initiated by a false flag operation. Anyway, that's not something we want to go into here. So yeah, false flag operations are very common in history and have been used to start wars. When someone wants to start a war and blame it on the other side, the best way to do it is to have some kind of a false flag operation. Okay. Here, there's another article on worldtribune.com about Korea rush. China hustles to jumpstart North Korea economy. Hundreds of Chinese companies are flocking to North Korea as sanctions grow. Sanctions show signs of loosening amid Kim Jong-un's pledge of denuclearization. You know, it was in Singapore. It was kind of interesting to see at that news conference where someone with President Trump, and someone brought up this fact that cross-border trade between North Korea and China seemed to be growing, and that and Trump sort of shrugged it off. He says, "Well, you know, it is what it is." And that, of course, when the president of the United States says something like that, it encourages even looser sanctions. In other words, further loosening of the sanctions. So I don't know if he actually intended that, but that's the effect that it's having. Beijing may be looking to counter the initiative taken by the U.S. at the historic Singapore summit, during which President Trump presented Kim with a vision and a video for a prosperous North Korea. The rush of Chinese enterprises into North Korea came after Kim met with Chinese Supreme Leader Xi Jinping in Beijing and Dalian 3 times in recent weeks. The two leaders have reportedly discussed ways to rebuild the North's economy, Yonhap noted in a June 22 report. About 200 Chinese firms that participated in the Pyongyang Spring International Trade Fair held in the North's capital from May 23 to 25 to discuss cooperation with North Korean public enterprises in fields such as agriculture, electronics, machinery, construction, food, daily necessity, and drainage, said the sources, the report said. The Pyongyang Trade Fair drew 260 corporate participants from 15 countries this year, 70% of which were from China. The Chinese companies participated in Pyongyang's trade fair soon after Kim and Xi met in Dalian in an apparent indication of Beijing's move to ease sanctions in the North. There is talk that discussions on economic cooperation are already underway between Chinese and North Korean companies, a source told Yonhap. The source noted the large-scale Chinese participation in Pyongyang trade fair was also linked to a ranking North Korean delegation's 11-day tour of China's major economic hubs in May. The North Korean delegates visited sites of China's economic development and reportedly discussed cooperation with officials in Shanghai and Shanxi province, Xi's birthplace. Well, China has tried this before. They've taken North Korean officials around, to the special economic zones and shown, hey, look, here's how you can merge capitalist economics with a communist dictatorship. And North Korea in the past has not gone for this. They've actually almost went for it. At one point, of course, there's the special economic zone way up in the northeast. Way up in the northeast, Cheongjin, is that Najin? That's a Najin and Cheongjin area. And of course, there's the area near the South Korean border where South Korean companies go in there and they invest and they utilize North Korean workforce to create products, to manufacture products which are then sold in South Korea or are exported from South Korea to the world. The Najin Cheongjin situation, we don't hear too much about it. I don't think it's been all that successful. The area near the South Korean border is an on again, off again situation where sometimes it gets shut down because of political considerations. And the last time it got shut down, a lot of South Korean companies lost a lot of money. And it's mainly small and medium-sized companies that have been investing in that, because large companies have never been really attracted to that deal because of the volatility and the unpredictability of a North Korean policy, where it can be shut down at any time if Kim Jong-un gets up on the wrong side of the bed, and which is actually basically what happened one day. It got shut down, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. But there was also another economic zone that was supposed to be created at the mouth of the Yalu River, or near the mouth of the Yalu River there. And the Chinese guy who was going to do that actually finally wound up being arrested and charged with corruption, I think, and got killed, I think, got executed. So these special economic zones have not been very successful for North Korea in the past. I mean, the Najin, Cheongjin area up there in the northeast, I think, has been surrounded by barbed wire to make sure that people who are in there do not have contact with the North Korean population. So the North Korean population does not see or is not influenced by any kind of development that may take place there. So we'll see if what this leads to. Maybe this is China's effort to, as it says, try to regain the initiative on the Korean Peninsula, but maybe this is China's way of trying to effect regime change, because that will be the effect. If North Korea becomes economically developed, there will be regime change, because widespread poverty is an important element in the current regime, in sustaining the current regime. So if there is development, you will see regime change, and maybe with that regime change, the nuclear weapons can be eliminated. Wow, that would be an interesting twist. Here we have a report also on WorldTribune.com about Merkel, and Shift tells European allies to urgently address Iran's aggression. Now, wait a second. Merkel, has she been talking to Trump or something? This is interesting. German Chancellor Angela Merkel on June 21 said that while European countries wanted to maintain the 2015 nuclear accord with Iran, the Islamic Republic's ballistic missile program, its presence in Syria, and its role in the war in Yemen need to be addressed. You don't say. Angela, what's the matter here? You're becoming Trump. Germany moved quickly and aggressively after the accord to exploit commercial opportunities in Iran that critics said benefited the rogue state's development of strategic weapons. Iran's aggressive tendencies must not only be discussed, but rather we need solutions urgently, said Merkel after meeting Jordan's King Abdullah in Amman, where she announced 384 million euros of aid to Jordan this year. U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew the United Nations from the nuclear deal last month, but the deal's remaining signatories, Russia, China, Britain, France, and Germany, want to preserve it. Iran's ballistic missile program and the deal's failure to address it was one of the concerns cited by Trump in choosing to leave the deal. Iran has several times test-fired ballistic missiles in recent months in what Western countries say are a violation of the UN resolution enshrining the 2015 nuclear deal. In a June 21 column for the Washington Examiner, Tom Rogan noted that German Chancellor's comments are good words except for the fact that Merkel's government enables the hardliners aligned with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. German corporations, Rogan wrote, have provided the nuts and bolts, both figuratively and financially, of post-nuclear deal investments in Iran. Disinterested in who benefits from these deals on Iranian soil, Merkel has allowed German companies such as Siemens to throw money into Iranian economic sectors dominated by the IRGC. That's the Revolutionary Guard. That money ends up in the IRGC's global terrorist fundraising and operations network. Rogan continued, Iranian intelligence officers continued to use Germany as a veritable shopping market for actuation and delivery systems related to ballistic missiles and weapons of mass destruction. In Europe, there is a common attitude that Iran, while sometimes problematic, is best dealt with by increasing commerce and respect for its foreign policy interests, Rogan wrote. The problem with this delusion is that it benefits the hardliners over the more moderates in Tehran, disrupts Middle East stability, and damages Western and Israeli security. So, what Rogan is saying is that Germany is essentially doing what I've just said that North Korea does not want to do, which is to provide prosperity for the population in hopes that a larger middle class will somehow overthrow the dictatorship, which happens over the long term. You know, I witnessed this directly in Korea, where in 1987, in June 1987, you started seeing people in white shirts and ties demonstrating on the streets, which is not what we were seeing there before that. Before that, it was students or radicals or people in jeans and so forth. But when you see white shirts and ties being worn by demonstrators, you know that there's regime change about to come. In 1987, in June 1987, all the female employees of the tourist hotels were demonstrating. They would get down in the lobby and sit down in the lobby and sing their Marxist demonstration songs, and it was clear then that something was changing, and this can happen in other countries too, and I think eventually it will happen in Iran, but that kind of change takes time. It's a gradual thing, and it comes to a threshold at some point, which is another one of those thresholds that no one can predict. It happens sooner or later, but in this case, later rather than sooner. Well, in the short term, though, as Tom Rogan is saying, the hardliners get the benefit. Hardliners get the benefit. But at some point, the people will just rise up and say, hey, enough is enough. But that point has to come when they can afford to do that, where they can go a few days without income or a month or so without income, without being paid. And that's not the case, I think, right now. Okay, but so Merkel saying good things, but Tom Rogan saying, yeah, those are good words, but not going to do very much. Surprise poll, nation backs Trump on migrant children's plight, blames the parents. I think that is where the blame belongs there. DOJ staffer harassed Nielsen at dinner, tweeted from work against terrorizing immigrants. Strzok was moving to fast-track Russia investigation as he texted vow to stop Trump. Silence major media skips news of 2,300 arrests in nationwide pedophile crackdown. Now this happened, that crackdown happened a week or so ago, about 10 days ago, just as we were celebrating our holy day with the Day of True All Things, and 2,300 arrests. But the major media is skipping that. Why? Well, they protect these people. They protect these people. How is it that arresting 2,300 child predators and pedophiles is not big news? And it was in the news here and there, but it was not the kind of big news that you would expect. And if they're really interested in children, as they claim to be with these immigrant children being separated from their mothers, if they claim to be actually interested in children, then they would make big news out of this. They would have a lot of coverage on this, which just goes to show you that it's only what is politically expedient that gets the big coverage. Okay. All right, let's take a break, and we'll be back in a minute or so with more news from a Chunuk perspective.
their own, on the run, when their lives have only begun. These could be our daughters and our sons. And just like a drum, I can hear their hearts beating. I know my God won't let them be defeated. Every child has a dream to belong and be loved. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love the least of these, then they will be brave and free. Shout your name in victory. When we love the least of these, when we love the least of these. Break our hearts once again. Help us to remember when we were only children hoping for a friend. Won't you look around? These are the lives that the world has forgotten, waiting for doors of our hearts and our homes to open. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love the least of these, then they will be brave and free. Shout your name in victory. When we love the least of these, when we love the least of these. If not us, who will be like Jesus to the least of these? If not us, tell me who will be like Jesus to the least of these. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love. Little hands, shoeless feet, lonely eyes looking back at me. Will we leave behind the innocent to grieve? On their own, on the run, when their lives have only begun. These could be our daughters and our sons. And just like a drum, I can hear their hearts beating. I know my God won't let them be defeated. Every child has a dream to belong and be loved. Boys become kings, girls will be queens, wrapped in your majesty. When we love the least of these, then they will be brave and free.
At break of day, in hope we rise, we speak your name.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, June 23rd, 2018, 9th year of Chungi and the 5th month and the 10th day. So David Hogg, the 18-year-old, attended the, he's a VIP now. The 18-year-old attended the Parkland, Florida school where a student murdered 17 people in February, then made himself famous with relentless calls for gun control in the wake of the tragedy. Now he's got a book deal and publicists and armed guards. Sean DeSoma snapped some pictures of Hogg strolling the streets of New York City recently with his new entourage in tow. Here, this is on Twitter, I guess. Yeah, this is looks like it's on Twitter. And the tweet says, here's at David Hogg 111 in NYC today with armed guards and a bunch of publicists. Hashtag never again, hashtag hypocrites. This someone posted to Twitter. And here you can see the photograph. Are you showing it? Okay. And see the two men in suits there. Of course, they're concealing, but we assume that they're armed. The post prompted a tit for tat with Hogg and his supporters. David Hogg's response was, "Love you too." So I guess that basically acknowledges that those are armed guards. I don't know why he would acknowledge that. Yeah, okay. So yeah, that's the hypocrisy of the anti-gun people who don't want guns for anybody else, but they do want guns for themselves. On Breitbart this morning, we see Sharpton on separating families. Trump's base wouldn't tolerate seeing white children look treated like that. It's always has to be about race, doesn't it? Identity politics. Pentagon asked to house 20,000 unaccompanied migrant children. Political digs deep, shocking expose on Stephen Miller by third grade classmate. Wow. That's going back really far. 9 times MS-13 gang members posed as minors used kids to enter U.S. illegally. Deep State weaponizing leaks against Trump appointing Mary Stoll and Peter Strzok subpoenaed by House Judiciary Committee. Trump threatens Europe with 20% tariff on cars. Democrat compares Border Patrol to Nazis at Auschwitz using 2014 photos. Of course, 2014 was when Obama was in office. And a leading African-American pastor, hell is a fairy tale like Santa Claus. Let's look into this one. Who is this? Of course, Satan does not want you to believe in God, also does not want you to believe in hell, although he does. Let's see. The Reverend Timothy Rogers, the popular pastor of Prince of Peace Church in Blytheville, Arkansas, said Wednesday that hell is an imaginary place invented to scare ignorant believers, adding that when you're dead, you're done. Wow. Wait a second. This is a pastor? When you're dead, you're done? Speaking at the funeral of a 30-something man, he said he had not known. Reverend Rogers told the congregation that they had been sold a lie and bamboozled into believing in hell. All that stuff is a fairy tale. To believe in hell means you have to believe in Santa Claus. I don't care how you cut it. Hell is an imaginary place, and I was told that if anything that does not have an explanation must be imagination, he said. The celebrated African-American preacher said that hell is part of a fantasy created by church leaders for their benefit. Church is corrupt, he said. The church don't want to address what's really wrong with you. They just want you to be quiet, sit down and act nice, he said. You want a baby to be quiet, just tell them Santa Claus is coming to town, only until their eyes come open and they realize that Santa Claus has never come to town, he said. I don't come to feed you a lie today. I came to feed you the truth. I don't believe in a lot of stuff that church gave me. I quit. Matter of fact, I don't want church. I want God. I want good. Rogers said, I don't want to do church. I want to do good because everybody that doing church ain't doing good. Most folk who doing good don't even go to church, he says. Pastor Rogers said that the lie extends beyond the existence of hell to the entire idea of an afterlife, insisting that heaven doesn't exist either. So that's why you can talk about a hell that you don't know, nobody went to. For 1 billion years, ain't nobody ever came back and told you that they were hot. for 1 billion years, ain't nobody ever came back and told you that they up in yonder singing around in a choir. I didn't come for you to agree with me. I know how to lay it out to y'all exalted, but I don't care. I didn't come for you to agree with me, he said. God gave us life so that we can do whatever you want to do with your life, Rogers said, adding that the Bible is merely a self-help manual on how to live a successful life. When your earthly life comes to an end, he has had it, you're done. Whoa. This is a pastor? In his sermon, Rogers displayed the Bible as an ancient literature that younger generations have never understood, saying that the church has failed them by feeding them a fantasy that only benefited those in leadership positions. Other Christian leaders, such as Pastor Robert Matthews of Kingdom Vision International Church in Mississippi, were quick to denounce Rogers' message, noting that it does not square with Jesus' message. Okay? Yeah, you don't say. The erroneous teaching of Pastor Tim Rogers, Matthews said in a statement Thursday, proves the necessity of discipleship and sound doctrine in our times. The description of hell, subsequently heaven, as a fairy tale is both a dangerous, deadly, and demonic doctrine designed by Satan to steal the souls of men who live with no fear of judgment. He said the counter for this is anointed, sound biblical doctrine. Well, there not being an afterlife, of course, that is not true, and that follows from the fact that God is eternal, and as I said, as we said in the beginning, He created human beings to be His partners in love, so that He created us out of His irrepressible. Is that right? What was it? Irrepressible impulse. Is that the word? To create, to give love to an object partner so as to feel joy and love. So we are eternal. We are created as eternal beings because we are to live eternally with God in the third phase of our life. Father divided human life into 3 phases. The first phase is the phase in the womb. And, of course, human life begins with conception. Life begins at conception, and there's the first phase that occurs in the womb for about 40 weeks. And then there's the second phase, which is in this earthly world, and then the third phase is the eternal phase in the spirit world. And the Father true Father goes into all the purposes for each phase and everything like that. But because God is eternal, also He has created us to be eternal beings. So we go to spirit world, but what this guy Rogers, is it Tim Rogers? Yeah, saying is not without a kernel of truth in terms of the church exploiting this over the centuries to benefit itself and to benefit its leaders, to try to control people by telling them that if they don't act right, they'll go to hell in the future, or saying that they should endure suffering in this age, in this earthly life, because they will go to heaven in the future, this kind of thing. So it is true that the church has exploited this, and it has made the church corrupt. But the fact that it has been exploited does not negate the fact that fundamentally there is a spirit world, there is an afterlife. We do continue to exist. The Washington Post article that came out by Tom Dunkel made a reference to Father, where he said Reverend Moon, or at least his spirit, sort of saying that, well, it's not actually Reverend Moon, but it's his spirit. There's one place where that's, and this is a common saying where people say, well, he's not here, but his spirit is here, or something like that. He's not here, but his memory is here, or something like that. But no, it is the spirit self that is the actual me. The physical body is a temporary vessel that we are given by God as a means, or as a tool, or as a vessel in which we can perfect our character, where we can bring our character to completion, let's say. I don't like to use the word perfect. To bring our character to completion, to complete our character through our own portion of responsibility, so that we can become God's sons and daughters. We can inherit His creativity, and we can have a dominion. We can actually be qualified to have dominion over creation as its co-creators, as part of it, because we are creating ourselves, and so by creating our own character, by developing our own character, we become co-creators, and that makes us qualified to stand with God as co-creators of creation. So the physical body plays an important part, but it is not me. This is not me. What is me is what is inside that physical body, the spirit body, the spirit self. That is the me that will live eternally, live eternally in the spirit world. And how we live in the spirit world is determined by our relationship with Christ, our relationship with God. Our Father said that in the spirit world we will breathe air. We will breathe love as we breathe in a similar way to how we breathe air here. We will breathe love. So that means to have give and take with love. So if you have to be able to learn during this time on earth to learn how to give love and receive love. Give love and receive love. True love, that's true love, centering on God. Not the Stormy Daniels type of love where it says, oh, I'm going to go down to the border and help the migrant kids. That's not the kind of love that we're talking about. That's pretty transparently fake love. But for a porn actress to be promoting herself like that. But to be able to give true love centering on God means living for the sake of others, truly for the sake of others. So this pastor, while I understand he's coming from a critique on the corruption of the church, and it's certainly true that people who do good are often not churchgoers, and that's why the Second King is targeting Second Amendment Christians or people in the gun community because they may not go to church, they may not even believe in God, or may not even believe in Jesus. So in that sense, they're not Christians, but still they are honest and upright people who have integrity. And perhaps those people have more integrity than many of the people who are in church. But when this guy, Tim Rogers, denies the afterlife, then he is promoting a lie. He is promoting a lie. And that is unfortunate that he is doing this. We need to be clear that there is an afterlife in the sense we are in the before life, I would say, because that is the real life, and right now is kind of the pre-life, you might say. That's not Father's term, so that's my own term. But when we're dead, we're not done. When we're dead, we're just getting started. Pastor Rogers. Anyway, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on this, so to speak. Okay, but really, evangelical Christianity needs to connect with the Second King. Otherwise, it's going to get invaded by Satan, like with this particular pastor, saying that the afterlife does not exist. That is certainly something that Satan wants us to believe. He does not want us to believe in Satan. He tries to deny his own existence so that he can work more effectively. He does not want us to believe in Satan. He does not want us to believe in the spirit world. But it does exist. All right. Bloomberg donating $80 million for congressional gun control candidates. This is the former mayor of New York who's spending a lot of money trying to stop guns. And I guess this is one way in which wealth can be transferred. Gun control proponent Michael Bloomberg is donating $80 million to Democratic candidates in hopes of flipping the House of Representatives to a pro-gun control position. He announced his intentions via Twitter. This is him tweeting on June 20th, a couple days ago. Congress has failed legislatively and constitutionally. We need a new leadership that will reassert Congress as a co-equal branch of government. In the midterm elections, I will be supporting Democrats in their bid to take over the House. My full statement. And then he gives a link to that statement. Bloomberg posted a more thorough announcement to MikeBloomberg.com where he bemoaned Republican refusal to punish law-abiding gun owners for the behavior of criminals who misuse firearms. Bloomberg wrote, Republicans who control both houses of Congress have done little to reach across the aisle to craft bipartisan solutions, not only on gun and climate change, but also on jobs, immigration, healthcare, and infrastructure. As a result, Congress has done very little. He went on to intimate that Republicans have refused to prevent the abuse of power and preserve the rule of law. He said, and so this fall I'm going to support Democrats in their efforts to win control of the House. Bloomberg did have praise for two Republicans, Senator John McCain, whom he referred to as a friend, and Senator Pat Toomey, Republican of Pennsylvania, whom he praised for breaking with the NRA and supporting post-Sandy Hook gun controls. That's Pat Toomey, Republican of Pennsylvania, who's being praised by Mark Bloomberg for breaking with the NRA and supporting post-Sandy Hook gun controls, which would not have prevented the Sandy Hook Elementary School attack. Pat Toomey's not up for election this year, but when he does come up for election, we're going to have to look very, very closely at his voting record and just what he is doing, because gun control right now is the primary issue in the United States. And that is, I think, the issue that we need to judge judge candidates by when we decide who to vote for in the November elections. We'll be getting into that more later. Not later in this broadcast, but later on as we get closer towards the November election. All right, so Pat Toomey. Okay. Safety risk. Delta Airlines will no longer allow pit bulls as service animals. So if you're on your way to the airport right now with your pit bull service animal, you can turn back. That is if you're going to fly Delta Airlines. Maybe other airlines allow it. I don't know. 3 in 5 liberal voters say make America a refugee camp for the world's poor. This is the open borders effort that they are doing. You know, they say no wall, no border, et cetera, et cetera. More than 3 in 5 liberal voters in the United States say the country should be made into a refugee camp for the world's poor, a new survey finds. The latest Rasmussen poll reveals the extent to which American liberals long for the U.S. to be a bastion of open borders and multiculturalism, serving foreign populations rather than American citizens. About 61% of self-identified liberal likely voters said they disagreed with this statement. The United States will not be a migrant camp, and it will not be a refugee holding facility. It won't be. So 61% disagree. Likewise, 59% of likely voters who strongly despised Trump's populist economic nationalist agenda said they too disagreed with the statement, indicating that they would like to see the nation transformed into a refugee camp for foreign nationals. Meanwhile, conservatives and the majority of likely voters agreed that the U.S. should never become a refugee camp, as Breitbart News noted. Roughly 54% of Americans said they agree the U.S. will not be a migrant camp and that it will not be a refugee holding facility. Only 54%? Buchanan had a interesting story yesterday we didn't have time to get into. Let me try to find that. He was asking whether the West has the will to survive. Buchanan sometimes is good, sometimes not. Here we go. Has the West the will to survive? Let's see what he has to say. If you're, let's see here. Trying to find the beginning of the article. If you're pathetically weak, the country is going to be overrun with millions of people. And if you're strong, then you don't have any heart. That's a tough dilemma. I'd rather be strong. So said President Donald Trump on issuing his, Yura, can you get me some water, please? So said Donald Trump on issuing his order halting the separation of children from parents caught breaking into the country. Trump's enemies are celebrating a victory, yet the issue remains. Under U.S. law, teenagers and tots cannot be detained for more than 20 days and must be held in the least restrictive facilities. But if the children cannot be separated from their parents as they await trial, both will have to be released to keep families together. We are back to catch and release. When that welcome news hits Central America, the migrant stream moving north will become a river that never ceases to flow. The questions America and the West face might thus be framed. Is there a liberal, progressive, Christian way to seal a 2,000-mile border, halt millions of migrants from crossing it illegally, and send intruders back whence they came? Or does the thank you very much. Or does the preservation of Western nations and peoples require measures from which liberal societies today reflexively recoil? Well, in Europe, Hungary and other countries have built walls, or not walls, but fences. They were sort of chicken wire fences along the border to keep people from coming in. Or does the preservation, does the survival of the West as a civilization require a ruthlessness the West no longer possesses? Consider what our fathers did to build this country. The English settlers brought in 600,000 slaves, ethnically cleansed the Indians, joined their cousins in a war to expel the French, then revolted and threw out those cousins to claim all the land to the Mississippi for ourselves. Jefferson grabbed the vast Louisiana territory for $15 million from Napoleon, who had no right to sell it. Andrew Jackson drove the Spanish out of Florida, sent the Cherokee packing on the Trail of Tears, and told a dissenting Chief Justice John Marshall where he could go. Sam Houston tore Texas away from Mexico. Jimmy Polk took the Southwest and California in a war Ulysses Grant called the most unjust ever fought. When the South declared independence, Lincoln sent a 1 million-man army to march them back in a war that cost 600,000 lives. William McKinley sent armies and warships to seize Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Guam, and the Philippines. The indigenous peoples were not consulted. God told me to take the Philippines, said McKinley. The conquest and colonization of the New World and the creation of the United States and its rise to world power required acts of aggression and war of which many among our elites are ashamed. They exhibit their guilt by tearing down the statues of the men who perpetrated the crimes, unquote, that created America. But of these elites, it may be fairly said, they could never have built a nation like ours, which brings us again to the larger questions. While our but of these elites, I see. So except for these elites, and what he means, he's using a little bit strange grammar here, but it's not incorrect, but it's a little bit just uncommon. But of these elites, it may be fairly said, they could never have built a nation like ours, which brings us again to the larger questions. While our forefathers would have not hesitated to do what was needed to secure our borders and expel intruders, it is not a settled matter as to whether this generation has the will to preserve the West, capital West and W, meaning not just the Western United States, but the West in general. Progressiveness may parade their moral superiority as they cheer the defeat of the zero-tolerance policy, but they have no solution to the crisis. Indeed, many do not even see it as a crisis because they do not see themselves as belonging to a separate tribe, nation, or people threatened by an epochal invasion from the Third World. They see themselves as belonging to an ideological nation, a nation of ideas, whose mission is to go forth and preach and teach all peoples the gospel of democracy, diversity, and equality. And this is why the establishment was repudiated in 2016. It was perceived as too elite, too liberal, too weak to secure the borders and repel the invaders. If you're really, really pathetically weak, the country is going to be overrun with millions of people, said Trump Wednesday. Is he wrong? Since the Cold War ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union, it has grown apparent that the existential threat to the West comes not from Tsar Vladimir's Russian divisions returning to the Elbe River. The existential threat came from the South. Half a century ago, Huri Boumediene, Algeria, Boumediene, that's right. Houari Boumediene, the leader of a poor but militant Algeria, allegedly proclaimed at the United Nations, one day millions of men will leave the southern hemisphere to go to the northern hemisphere, and they will not go there as friends, because they will go there to conquer it, and they will conquer it with their sons. The wombs of our women will give us victory. This is the existential crisis of the West. Thus Trump seeks to build a wall, turn back intruders, and bring Vladimir Putin back into the Western camp, where Russia belongs. Thus the new populist regime in Rome blocks boats of refugees from landing in Italy. Thus Angela Merkel looks like yesterday, and Viktor Orban, that's the prime minister of, or president of Hungary, looks like tomorrow. Okay, so that's the end of Buchanan's column. Yeah, I think he's right in many ways. And he has this quotation by the Algerian leader Boumediene about people coming to conquer the West. And this is part of the judgment that is happening as a result of the Han Mother's betrayal. But Father talked in terms of the Korean word Pyeongjunhwa, and I think we've tried various ways to translate that. But it means a leveling, leveling. And he talked about the leveling of leveling in many ways of income, especially in income and in access to technology, and this kind of thing. Leveling in terms of opportunity. And he talked about the Pyeongjunhwa between South and North Korea, for example. Right now, North Korea's economy is about 1/25 the size of the South Korean economy. And I think it's very likely that as a result of the Han Mother's betrayal, that we will have this kind of conquering of the West by people from poorer countries. And it didn't have to be this way. And, with Trump and whatever comes after Trump, perhaps it's still possible to avoid this because what is important is that the Protestant Judeo-Christian values that have been established in America by God be preserved, because God intended that to be the light on a hill, a light beacon to the world, so to be a guidepost, a guiding beacon to the world, so that this kind of ethos of freedom and responsibility could be spread to the world and as an important part of democracy. And in the Cheongguk, when Cheongguk is established under the Cheongguk Constitution, that will certainly be the truth, because Cheongguk Constitution requires people to take responsibility for their own lives. It does not allow the government to take responsibility for them. It does not allow the federal government to become involved in welfare, and it does not have a centralized police force that can enforce federal laws against the will of the community, because the police is decentralized. So if someone is breaking a law, they may not even be arrested if the people in that community agree that the law is unjust. So there could very well be that as Boumediene's prediction could very well come true. One day, millions of men who will leave the southern hemisphere to go to the northern hemisphere, and they will not go there as friends, because they will go there as though they will go there to conquer it, and they will conquer it with their sons. The wombs of our women will give us victory. That's the quote from Boumediene that Buchanan is using. All right. Where is this? Bloomberg yesterday had an article on Amazon.com, laughs at your, quote, sales taxes, unquote. I'm guessing that this refers to the Supreme Court's decision on Thursday that said that states can charge sales tax for online transactions, even if the company does not have a physical presence in that state. And you're thinking about it, that's going to cause a tremendous headache for small businesses. For example, in the church here, when we sell books, right now we collect sales taxes for Pennsylvania. And that happens when we sell a book to someone who lives in Pennsylvania. We collect a 6% sales tax, and then it's our church's responsibility to collect that tax and then send it in to the to the Pennsylvania government, state government. But if the Supreme Court ruling, I think, is going to mean that we're going to have to start collecting sales tax not only for the Pennsylvania government, but also for the New York government, for the New Jersey government, for the California government, for the Texas government, and I don't know how it's going to work. It's going to be very complicated. And this may mean that we will have to, I don't know, but it may mean that, small businesses will have to rely more on eBay or on Amazon, because those organizations already have the infrastructure in place to pay sales tax to various states. For us to be paying sales tax to 50 states, and the District of Columbia. Anyway, let's see. It's almost hard to remember now, but for a long time, Amazon.com Inc.'s major edge on brick-and-mortar rivals was price. That advantage mostly went away a while back, and today the Supreme Court carved off more when it ruled states can collect taxes on online sales. And yet Amazon will likely have no trouble continuing to vacuum up your shopping dollars, writes Sale Halzak. That's because its advantage these days is less about price and more about convenience. The same goes for other online retailers, Sarah suggests, like furniture seller Wayfair Inc., for instance, whose outstanding user interface, huge assortment of merchandise, and a supply chain designed for delivering bulky goods probably outweighs any downside from suddenly having to collect a little more in taxes. The Supreme Court has played a huge role in this saga. Today's decision reversed decades-old rulings that first exempted online retailers from state taxes. The court's moves seem almost perfectly designed to first help a fledgling industry and then take off the training wheels once it could cruise on its own, writes Justin Fox. Of course, physical retailers and President Donald Trump would argue those training wheels came off way too late. It might have happened sooner if Congress had passed some similar measures. It's kicked around for years, but Congress, it may shock you to learn, is essentially useless. So the High Court did its dirty work. That's not exactly healthy for our democracy, Justin suggests. Trump has not yet tweeted about the Supreme Court decision, though you imagine he's pleased given his many complaints about Amazon's competitive advantage. Of course, he's probably upset about more than just sales taxes. President Donald Trump's announcement that he wanted to form a space force led to many Starship Troopers jokes, but the idea is not, okay, that's a space force. That's another article. All right, but I think, all right, so he's saying, this article is saying that it's a small thing for Amazon to start collecting these sales taxes, but for small businesses, especially when we're selling to many states, people in many states around the country, I think it's going to be a major impediment to our business. have to see how it works out. But I'm concerned that it's going to be a trouble. All right. Let's look at some of these ways in which the left is fomenting this atmosphere of violence against conservatives. Protesters, it's the Washington Times, protesters descend on Kirstjen Nielsen's home. No justice, no sleep. I'm sure the neighbors appreciated this very much. A group of protesters gathered outside Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen's Virginia townhouse Friday morning, chanting "No justice, no sleep" and blaring audio of immigrant children crying. About 24 protesters with the progressive group Credo Action chanted with megaphones. Waved signs that read "Child Snatcher," and played the ProPublica audio clip of immigrant children being separated from their parents at the border, Huffington Post reported. So they are really escalating the situation, aren't they? Ms. Nielsen was forced to walk by protesters, shouting shame when she left her house, according to video posted on social media. One man shouted, "You belong in The Hague," and, quote, "You're a modern-day Nazi," unquote, as Ms. Nielsen entered her vehicle and left. The left is really normalizing the term Nazi. I mean, so once you start saying that anyone who disagrees with you is a Nazi, you really undermine and devalue the horror that was created by the National Socialist Party in Germany before and during World War II. Kirstjen Nielsen has not done anything that is similar to what the Nazis have done. And yet they call her a Nazi simply because they disagree with her policies. And in so doing, they uplift the Nazis. Heidi Hess, the co-director of Credo Action, said it's important to hold members of the Trump administration accountable, quote, everywhere, unquote. There's a child snatcher living in Alexandria, Virginia, Ms. Hess said in a statement. Rightfully so. There's a huge amount of attention focused on the border and the detention centers, but the people who are making the decisions are here in D.C., so it's important to shine a spotlight on them as well. The protest took place just 3 days after Ms. Nielsen was chased out of a Mexican restaurant near the White House by protesters with the Metro D.C. Democratic Socialists of America. Conservatives don't do this towards Obama supporters. But the left has to use violence and the threat of violence as a tool, because that is all they have. And people who want to centralize power have this in common. They have these gangs that go around terrorizing people, and this is what Nazis did, by the way. So the left is using Nazi tactics, actual Nazi tactics. The Nazis were guilty of this, and many right-wing authoritarian governments have been guilty of this. Left-wing authoritarian governments have been guilty of this. Communists, of course, do this. This is what Mao Zedong's Red Guards were all about. So that is why we say that the right-wing dictatorship and left-wing dictatorship are pretty much the same. They're both the centralization of power. They both reject sovereignty of individuals and of communities. So we see how the left here is fomenting violence, fomenting an atmosphere of violence in a way similar to what the Nazi Party in Germany was doing in the 1930s. Let me see here if there's anything more in this article. I have a series of tweets by various people, by their neighbors and so forth. And going back to Buchanan's article, previously, something might have been done about this kind of action. The right might have also, the conservatives also might have used force to counter this kind of force, but that's not the case today. WikiLeaks publishes identities of ICE employees, Mexican presidential candidate. We read that. Stormy Daniels heading to the border to help kids. My goodness. Trying to attract attention. Porn actress and Trump antagonist Stormy Daniels says she is heading to the border to help with the migrant crisis, but in a week as soon as she can figure out her best course of action. Daniels' grandstanding, Trump-hating attorney Michael Avenatti already jumped on the border crisis and is representing detained migrants and also claims to represent ICE whistleblowers. But first, Daniels had to hang out in Boston with psycho Trump hater Kathy Griffin, where they posed together flipping the bird at President Trump. Yeah, okay. Again, fomenting violence. Kathy Griffin, of course, is one major figure in that, where she took a photograph of herself holding what appeared to be a bloodied head of President Trump, a decapitated head of President Trump. This kind of image creates and encourages an atmosphere of violence. Elizabeth Vargas, during her interview of our king, was saying, "Well, aren't you afraid that someone that you train is going to go out and use guns in the wrong way for the sake of evil?" But Vargas should be looking at this, the way that the left is fomenting this atmosphere of violence in America today. If Vargas wants to win another Emmy Award, if she wants to get back to her position in ABC, which she left at the end of May because of her personal problems, then she needs to focus on some real stories like that, not on fake stories, fake cults. All right. Let's take a break, and we'll come back in a minute with more news from a Tony perspective.
Boy, wasn't that fun shooting this Tommy gun today?
It's always fun shooting Tommy guns. This one especially. It's just absolutely gorgeous.
All polished and chromed up. It really looks like $1 million.
Yeah. Elliot Ness would have loved one of those.
Yeah, and it's available right now in your favorite dealer, and you go pick one up.
Yeah. Just have him call your distributor.
I mean, the gun, was initially made way back when, back in the 27 is this one.
Yeah. Model 27.
I was surprised by how quick it knocked down those plates.
Oh, 3.5 second run. Under 3.5 second run, knocking down a plate right. 341.
I mean, the gun is heavy. It's about, 12, 14 pounds, especially with this drum, but it's surprising how quick you can go with it. It would actually make quite a good self-defense rifle at home.
If I climbed in somebody's window and they were aiming that at me, I think I'd get out of there real quick. So.
That sounds about right to me.
Just the intimidation factor alone.
Fire!
Welcome back to the King's Report for June 23rd, 2018. Tim Miller sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon. I just want to go one more article on this atmosphere of violence being fomented by the left. Democratic New York governor candidate Cynthia Nixon calls ICE a terrorist organization. This is the kind of rhetoric that creates violence. Thursday at a Manhattan church, New York Democratic gubernatorial candidate and former Sex and the City star Cynthia Nixon said U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is a terrorist organization. Nixon said ICE has strayed so far away from its mission. It is supposed to be here to keep Americans safe, but what it has turned into, frankly, is a terrorist organization of its own that is terrorizing people who are coming to this country. Nixon is challenging incumbent Governor Andrew Cuomo in the Democratic primary. I doubt that she will win, but one comment here says Cynthia Nixon supports MS-13, Hamas, Hezbollah, and abortion. Nixon is a terrorist enabler. That's exactly what that kind of rhetoric does. I want to go back to the situation on the debt, because so much attention is in the media is focused on the border and stuff like that, that it's easy for us to get caught up in that. I'm afraid I may have gotten caught up a little bit this morning myself, but we need to really focus on what is really going to bring this country down in the short term, because the immigration crisis will bring the country down in the long term, but by that time the country will already be down because of the debt and the crash of the economy. The Observer, the national debt is the difference between the money the government receives from taxes, interest, and other payments and the dollars that are paid out. There has been a national debt since the early 1800s, and it has varied depending on the world's and the United States economies. A large national debt is a stranglehold on the economy. A large national debt is a stranglehold on the economy. It prohibits economic growth because government borrowing soaks up private savings that would often be used to invest in productivity. And it also means that we have to pay interest on that debt. A large national debt creates a drag on the economy and many times leads to lower wages and thus a lower standard of living. Every dollar that the government has to pay to service the national debt, that means the interest rate, that is, takes away from spending on education and infrastructure investments and paying for needed research in many areas, or lowering taxes. If we didn't have to pay that interest, we could lower taxes. The maintaining of the national debt is truly a bipartisan problem. Whenever the debt ceiling is raised, senators and congresspeople from all political parties often vote to increase the borrowing. Therein lies the problem. We as voters elect our representatives to be prudent and frugal with our tax dollars. When they lose sight of the fact that they are spending our money, they endanger each of us by weakening the economy. They think that they are giving people money, but they are not. It's not the government's money. It's our money that's being given away. The areas of spending are also way out of whack. Federal spending should be used only for the military, disaster relief, infrastructure maintenance, and efficient operation of the federal government. This is the Observer, and the areas of spending are also way out of whack. Federal spending should be used for the military, defense of our nation, disaster relief, infrastructure maintenance, and the efficient operation of the federal government. When tax dollars are doled out to country after country as foreign aid, the national economy is injured. So many times the massive foreign aid dollars being spent do not have strings attached or repayment plans in place. If you as an individual were loaning someone money, you most likely would expect some kind of assurances that an attempt to pay back the money would be agreed to. But with foreign aid, the opposite is true in many times. Our dollars are given away to countries that do not have the means to pay back, and sometimes even given to enemies of our country. The recent massive payments to Iran would be an example of this misguided spending. Another problem area of spending is the massive dollars given out for pork barrel projects and or spending on research that mean very little to the average taxpayer. We hear of highways to nowhere and tax dollars being spent on the study of frogs, snails, birds, or the famous methane release from livestock. That's, gas. If those projects are important enough to do, then private money should be utilized rather than using the taxpayers' hard-earned dollars. Federal revenue will not rise enough to keep up with the increased spending. Most of the citizens are taxed to the point of insolvency already, so increasing the federal tax burden is out of the question. To ensure a stronger economy, future policymakers must slow down the spending and thereby reduce the growth of debt. So even this article is only talking about reducing the growth of debt, not about reducing the debt itself. Instead of going up like this, they're just talking about reducing it to something like this or something like this. But they're not talking about reducing it, the actual debt. If your family is spending more than its income, you have to cut spending in order to maintain your personal economy. It should be no different with the federal government. A federal government, state government, or family or individual cannot tax its way out of debt. And I wanted to go here to another story. Here we go. Russia cuts treasury holdings in half as foreigners start losing appetite for U.S. debt. So one reason we've been able to borrow so much money, that is to issue, basically the government, the way it gets money, of course, colloquially we say printing money, but what actually happens is that the Treasury will sell bonds and get money from people who buy those bonds. Russia cuts Treasury holdings in half as foreigners start losing appetite for U.S. debt. Foreign governments have, this is on CNBC, foreign governments have pared back their holdings of U.S. debt, reducing the total by nearly $10 billion in March and April. Russia was notable among the group, stepping back with a nearly 50% cut. The U.S. government needs buyers of its debt as the Fed continues to reduce its holdings and the budget deficit is projected to surge in coming years. That's the summary. Foreign governments pulled back their purchase of long-term U.S. debt as trade tensions escalated around the world. Of course, when there's less demand for U.S. treasuries, what that means is that the interest rate goes up because you need to offer a higher yield, lower price and higher yield in order to attract buyers. The declines are relatively small so far for notes and bonds, just shy of $5 billion each for March and April, the most recent months for which Treasury data are available, but it signals a potentially troubling trend. Quote, "We need all the help we can get in search for buyers of U.S. Treasuries due to the enormous supply coming our way in the next few years," unquote, Peter Bukvar, Chief Investment Officer at the Blakely Advisory Group, said in a note. "Our stance on trade with our trading partners could very well play into this in coming months and quarters, especially with China, the largest owner of U.S. Treasuries." Treasury means the Treasury bonds. That's the pieces of paper that the U.S. Treasury will sell saying, okay, we, the United States government, we owe you, let's say, $1 million, let's say, for example. And then they give this to China. They give this piece of paper to China, and then in return, we get $1 million from China. And then over the years, then, for example, if it's a 10-year note, then U.S. government is paying China interest every year or every quarter or something like that. Anyway, is paying interest constantly to service that debt. But in the case of Russia, they decided, no, we don't want to hold this debt anymore. So they sold it to someone else. They sold it, they cut their holdings in half. They said, okay, well, someone else can hold this. We don't want this anymore. President Donald Trump's administration has been in a tit-for-tat battle of tariff threats with multiple U.S. trading partners, particularly China. In addition, Trump has threatened to pull out of multilateral trade agreements like NAFTA and has slapped tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. One of the most glaring declines has come from Russia, which sliced its holdings of U.S. debt nearly in half from March to April, from $96.1 billion to $48.7 billion. Russia's treasury ownership peaked at $108.7 billion in May 2017. So you can see that with the ongoing Democratic Party's false narrative of Russia collusion with the Trump campaign, that Russia has been saying, okay, well, you know, we'll sell our debt of U.S. Treasuries. We'll get rid of that. So the highest point was in May of 2017, and ever since then, it's been going down. In all, foreigners held 6.17 trillion of the total 14.84 trillion of Treasury debt outstanding through April. The national debt, including intra-governmental holdings, has swelled to more than $21 trillion. Russia isn't the only country cutting back in its U.S. holdings. China, the largest owner of U.S. debt, reduced its level by $5.8 billion in April to $1.18 trillion, while Japan, the second largest, cut its holdings by $12.3 billion to $1.03 trillion. Ireland and the UK and Switzerland also pulled back. When counting all securities, including T-bills, the April decline came to $47.6 billion, or 0.8% reduction from March. Finding buyers for government debt has become increasingly important since the Federal Reserve halted its bond buying program in October 2016 after swelling its holdings to more than $4.2 trillion. Since October 2017, the central bank has been allowing a set level of proceeds it gets from those debt instruments to run off each month while continuing to reinvest the rest. The Fed's portfolio of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities since then has declined by $116 billion, or 2.8%, while foreign holdings have also fallen by 2.5%. So if people stop, people, by people I mean governments stop buying U.S. debt, U.S. treasuries that is, then yeah, basically it's like when you're playing musical chairs and the music stops. In this case, it may not stop, but at least it will slow down. Here in the Chicago Tribune, unemployment is low, so why aren't we reducing our national debt? That might sound like a good question. Let's see how they answer that. Let's say this is a letter to the editor. Let's see what he says. I would like to think that just about everyone is pleased that the unemployment rate is at its lowest point in recent history. This certainly seems to bode well. However, there is another facet to this story that is not being mentioned, and that is the national debt level. Yeah, that's exactly right. When we are at full employment, two things happen that pull in a positive direction. There is a reduction in unemployment payments to those willing and able to work but unable to find a position. This means that rather than receiving money from government agencies, these people are contributing to tax revenues and overall positive cash flow with reduced expense and increased income. As a result, we should be seeing a large decline in government debt. We saw this with the dot-com boom of the 1990s, and yet either this is not happening or it is not being reported. A reduction in the national debt should be at least as good a story as the reduction in the unemployment rate, but I fear that the debt is not shrinking as it should. Given this scenario, where are our elected officials, regardless of political stripe, on the debt issue? In my mind, this situation can only highlight how detached they are from fiscal responsibility. Our decision makers are apparently unclear on the concept of cost control. Whether one is involved in government or business or one's own household, we all know that revenue income can go up or down at any given time for any given length of time. As a result, cost control is paramount in ensuring that the books remain reasonably balanced. It is not a bad idea to have a rainy day fund as well. Now is the time to review spending and get it under control. As we all know, an economic downturn is going to happen at some point. When that occurs, the two positive points noted above turn negative. We need to be prepared when that happens. We are not, and it could get very uncomfortable for a very long time when the economic cycle turns down. Yep, it's going to be very uncomfortable. That is for very sure. So learn your bushcrafting skills, I would say, and be prepared to defend yourself and the resources, whatever resources you accumulate, because, yeah, things are going to get very uncomfortable, like this reader of the Chicago Tribune pointed out, that the most optimistic people are talking about reducing the growth of debt. Not about reducing debt, but reducing the growth of debt. This is a very bad situation that we are in. Alan Greenspan, I talked about Alan Greenspan, and you can go to YouTube and you can do a search on Alan Greenspan's name. And in the recent months, he has been a part of a couple of videos. He's been a guest on a couple of videos where he has talked about this situation. And, you know, Alan Greenspan has always talked about this fiscal policy being unsustainable. And he's continued to use that word, unsustainable. And he's continued to call on Congress to do something about it. But in his recent videos, recent appearances, just saying that, hey, you know, the American political system is simply not equipped to deal with this situation. Simply not equipped to deal with this situation. It's just not going to happen. Congress is not going to deal with this problem. And there's nothing that we can do about it. America's economy is going to collapse. We know it, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's what Alan Greenspan is saying, essentially, in his fancy academic words. You have to sort of, he speaks in a language that, I don't know if he knows a one-syllable word. He never speaks in single-syllable words. It's always 5, 6, 7-syllable words. So you have to have your dictionary ready, you know, to look at but if you listen to him closely and understand what he's saying, that's what he's saying, that everything's going to collapse and the sky's going to fall and nothing we can do about it. But he just says that we don't know when it's going to happen. It will happen, probably sooner rather than later. Anyway, so with that happy thought, I'm sorry, but you know, we have to be ready. I'm not trying to feed you paddling today, but maybe you can spend your Saturday studying this issue. Go on the web and study this yourself, and then consider how your family can do its best to prepare. None of us are going to be completely prepared when it happens. We're all going to feel pain, but we can be more prepared than we are today, right? We can do something to make ourselves a little bit more prepared than we would be otherwise. All right. Sorry to ruin your weekend, but hey, it's my job. Sorry. God bless. Really, God bless. Pray for God's blessing. Godspeed, and may His kingdom come, because that is the answer. After the judgment, God's kingdom will come. Goodbye.